Okay, so that was description and that was a sense of place. Let's talk a little bit now about personal experience and how this affects perhaps everybody's writing. My background is as a computer programmer. When I moved to Venice, I started teaching English. I had no knowledge of police procedural work whatsoever. I had a fragment of a story about a rediscovered prayer book by Bellini. I changed it to Giovanni Bellini because he's far more famous than Leonardo Bellini. I had a story about a man meeting Pink Floyd, which I knew I had to work into the book somehow. If you've read The Venetian Game, you'll know how I did it. But I had no idea who my protagonist was going to be and how on earth he was going to become involved in a story about a stolen antique prayer book. Could I make him a policeman? Well, you could do. I suppose it is possible to go along to the Questura and say, I'm a writer, I'd like to have some information about how you work. I could have done that. The trouble is, especially if you're setting a series in Venice, you are going to be compared with Donna Leon. Donna has written almost 30 books, I think, about Commissario Guido Brunetti. They are fantastically successful. Nobody is going to do the police procedural in Venice better than Donna Leon. So I knew I needed some other kind of intro for my character. Could I make him a private detective? For those of you who've been to Venice, you will know that makes no sense at all. It's a small city with relatively little crime. There would be no need for a private investigator in Venice. So what could I do? Well, fortunately, my business English student, the honorary consul from Thailand, came along. And every week when I went to teach him, he would be telling me about problems he'd had with nationals who had lost their passports, or possibly they'd been robbed, or perhaps even, they'd got into trouble with the police. And immediately I thought, if my protagonist was an honorary consul, he would have contacts in the police, with the churches, with every strata of Venice society, and people would come to him with problems. And immediately that solved so many issues for me. The second great good stroke of fortune I had was teaching English to a member of the Guardia di Finanza. And they are the police department that deal with tax crime, fraud, and brilliantly for me, they also deal with art crime. And it turned out that every 3 or 4 years, because art crime is international, members of the force have to go on a sort of top-up course in English. And so Andrea, as his name was, came to me for 2 hours every week for 10 weeks. And during every lesson, I would try and turn the conversation around to art crime and investigating it. It was immensely useful, so much so he gets his own dedication in the back of the Venetian Game. Bringing personal experience to things. Very much, especially in book 1, people say how much of this is actually about you. Well, I think perhaps people ask me that because I write in the first person. Why do I write in the first person? Well, quite simply, I tried writing the first chapter in the third person, in the past and in the present. I tried writing in the first person, in the present. I even tried trying it in the second person. None of it worked until I tried writing it from Nathan's point of view in the first person. Perhaps that's why people say, are you actually your protagonist? My answer to that, I suppose, is slightly complex. Stephen King says that every character you write is a reflection of yourself in some way. I don't know if that's true. I certainly think with my characters, there are characters I would like to be, there are characters I quite admire, or I would like to be their friend. I think, like many writers, I enjoy writing the villains most of all. I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe you get a chance to release things you could never do in your real life. Perhaps that's it. Going back again to your protagonist and who is he? Is it personal? How personal is he? How close is he to you? I once met Donna Leon, who was giving a talk on her writing. And she said something which I thought was very good. When she started writing about Commissario Guido Brunetti, she realized that she was going to be spending quite a lot of time in his head. And as a result, she wanted him to be somebody she liked. She didn't want to spend 9 months of the year writing about somebody she did not like. And I took that to heart, I think, and I think that does come over in the personality of Nathan Sutherland. Is he me? Well, I don't know. Perhaps he is. A lot of him is very similar. The most obvious things, of course, are the things that he likes. He likes cooking, so do I. He likes classical music, opera, so do I. He has this obsession with progressive rock music. Hawkwind, Jethro Tull, bands like that. He loves old films. He particularly loves old horror films. He loves Italian horror films like the films of Dario Argento and Mario Bava. I could have changed all that. He could have been, I think it's something of a cliche perhaps by now to have your protagonist like jazz music. Maybe it's that idea of improvisation or something like that. Although I do like jazz, I'm not particularly passionate about it. He could have been, interested in science fiction or film noir or things like that. But really the things Nathan likes are the things that I like. And the reason I do that, purely and simply, it's because I would be so happy if people went out after reading The Venetian Game or a Nathan Sutherland novel and thought, you know what, I'd quite like to listen to some Hawkwind or to some Jethro Tull. I'd quite like to see a film by Mario Bava or Dario Argento or an old Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee film. I would be thrilled if they did that. So really, that's where that element comes from. The stuff Nathan likes is the stuff that I like. How much of yourself do you bring to a character? How much of it is personal experience? Certainly in the first 2 books, I always say to people that more of this is true than you might actually expect. I've told you a lot about book 1. I'll briefly mention book 2, Vengeance in Venice, which is set during the Art Biennale. And the inspiration for that came about because one summer, in between school terms, I actually had the opportunity to work at the Venice Biennale. The project itself was set in the central pavilion in the main gardens in Venice. And over the course of 5 months, every day I would go along to the central pavilion along with somebody else, and 2 of us would stand on stage and we would read Karl Marx's Das Kapital from page 1 right to the very end. And when we got to the end, we started again. I think we went through the whole thing about 2.5 times in about 5 months. The reason I got the job is that the artist was looking for English-speaking actors in Venice. I got the gig on account of the English-speaking bit. It was, as you can imagine, an absolutely amazing insight into how the Biennale ran, into how the art world works, and I thought, I'm going to have to set a book during the Venice Biennale because of this little insight I've got here. For those of you who've read Vengeance in Venice will know that glass is kind of a theme. That came about from visiting, I think it was one of the Scandinavian pavilions that year. I'm pretty sure it was Norway. And the installation was just great sheets of glass, broken glass, separated from the audience, from the viewer, by a simple yellow strip running along the floor. And so you felt this incredible tension being near these things which were horrendously dangerous, quite frightening to look at, these great shards of glass. And I thought, my goodness me, if you weren't careful here, something very, very bad could happen. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler because I think it's on the back of just on the back cover of the book. Something terrible does happen involving large sheets of glass at the opening of Vengeance in Venice. Then, of course, the idea of working with glass brought me back again to Venice, and the idea of Murano glass. That you could build something potentially so dangerous, quite terrifying in these great foundries, these great furnaces on the island of Murano. So glass was a little theme running through it there. By the time I reached book 3, I decided I could stretch myself a bit, and probably less of it is informed by personal experience from the Venetian masquerade after. I always say to people, yeah, quite a lot of this is personal experience. The bars that Nathan goes to exist. His favourite restaurants are my favourite restaurants. You could, if you wished, construct quite a nice little Nathan Sutherland eating and drinking tour by using the books. Most of these places do exist, and if they don't exist, I mention them in the acknowledgements. As I said, my background is as a computer programmer and later as a teacher and translator. Maybe there's something to think on here. You don't necessarily have to have had direct experience of crime in order to read about it. All of us have personal experiences that we can actually bring to a story. Maybe not all of us have terribly exciting jobs, and goodness knows 25 years behind a keyboard coding, that was not really a terribly exciting job. But all of us meet people. All of us live in cities where we can walk around and look up and look down. You don't even have to live in a particularly beautiful city like Venice. Every city has features which will go unnoticed, which if you look around and take them in, they can be the start of a story. Even if we don't necessarily have interesting jobs, we all know people. We all come across stories. We all have life experiences. And they're just our experiences. They're our experiences to use and to tell. Nobody else can do that for us. So a conversation heard on a water bus in Venice or a regular bus in Glasgow, that can be the jumping off point for a story. Quite often I find if I'm on the Vaporetto or if I'm on a bus going to the mainland, I just look around at other passengers. What are they thinking about? What are they reading? What are they listening to? Then I put myself in the situation of saying, what would Nathan be thinking of in this situation? What would Dario be thinking of? What would Federica be thinking of? All of these things, they generate stories, they generate ideas. Even if we just have a regular life like being a computer programmer or an English language teacher in a foreign country, these experiences are ours, and they're ours to set down on paper if we wish, and they're ours to use as jumping off points for stories if we wish. Okay, a final plug again, The Venetian Game. It's the first book in the Nathan Sutherland series, which is set in Venice. What am I trying to do with them? I hope they're entertaining, purely and simply. I'm not trying to write great illuminating tracts on what makes us human or what makes us good or bad people. I hope they're entertaining. I think there's an honesty to them, and I think that's something you should try and do in your writing. Try and be honest. Stephen King, again, is very good on this. You can't bluff it. People will know if what you're writing is fake in some way, if you don't mean it. If you're obviously just doing it by the word count and being paid by the word. Readers are smart. They notice that. But I also think they notice if you are at least trying to be honest, and I think they respect that. So, if I was going to give any advice to any potential writers, you've got to write it from the heart. You've got to mean it. You've got to want to write. Because nobody sits down for 6 months of the year and writes a book if they don't want to write. You've got to want it. And if you love it, hopefully, other people will love it as well. I'll just finish by saying I'm very grateful to the city where I live for giving me a second chance, for giving me the chance of doing something I thought I would never be able to do when I was much younger. And as I always say, more of this is true. than you might expect. Thanks very much for listening. I appreciate it.